Millions of years ago, long before the first humans ever stood at the edge of the sea and looked out across the water, the oceans of our planet were already ancient, already vast, already deep, already carrying within them the full and intricate weight of hundreds of millions of years of life. The continents rested in unfamiliar configurations, arranged across the surface of the earth in shapes that no living eye has ever seen. Beneath the surface of those ancient waters, entire worlds existed in a quiet and continuous abundance. At the surface, when the sea might have seemed calm and unremarkable, a broad expanse of blue-green water moving in slow swells, the horizon empty in every direction, the sky above pale and wide and full of light. But below that quiet surface, life moved constantly and in every direction. The water thick with organisms from the microscopic to the enormous, each one bound to the others in the long and patient web of living things. Sea turtles glided slowly between their feeding grounds, their ancient forms unchanged across the vast stretches of time that had already passed. Early whales crossed enormous distances through warm prehistoric. It seized their low, resonant calls, traveling for miles through the deep water, filling the ocean with a music so old it has no name. And somewhere in the deeper water, where the sunlight fades gradually from green to blue to a dim and weightless twilight, a very large shape moved quietly through the open sea. It did not rush, and it had no reason to. It moved with the calm and unhurried confidence of something that had occupied the highest position in this world for a very long time. Its passage through the water as natural and inevitable as the turning of the tide. Other predators gave it room without any drama or display, simply adjusting their own paths the way smaller rivers adjust around a stone. And the enormous creature continued on, patient and steady, through the warm and ancient sea. Long after this animal disappeared, strange fossilized teeth would begin emerging from rocks and riverbeds across the world. Teeth so large and so unlike anything living that early scholars believed they must have belonged to dragons, or perhaps to giants, or to creatures fallen from the sky. Those teeth belonged to the greatest shark that has ever lived, a predator whose reign over the ancient ocean spanned nearly 20 million years. Its name is Megalodon, and this is its story. To understand Megalodon fully, we must first allow ourselves to imagine the world in which it lived. And that world was richer, warmer, and more abundantly alive than the oceans we know today. Around 20 million years ago, during the geological period known as the Miocene epoch, the Earth was in the midst of one of the most productive chapters in the history of marine life. Global temperatures were higher than they are now. Polar ice existed, but far less of the planet's water was locked away inside massive glaciers, and as a result, sea levels stood higher than they do today, flooding the edges of continents and creating vast networks of warm, shallow coastal seas. These warm coastal waters became some of the most biologically productive environments in the history of the ocean. Coral reefs spread across the sunlit shallows in great living formations, their branching structures sheltering communities of fish and invertebrates of extraordinary variety. Seagrass meadows stretched across gently sloping coastal floors, their long blades swaying in the slow underwater current, tended by the grazing animals that moved through them like herds across a quiet meadow. The whole of the shallow ocean was layered and alive, organized into a complexity of feeding relationships that had been building, us and refining itself across hundreds of millions of years. Further offshore, where the continental shelf dropped away into the open ocean, underwater mountains called seamounts rose from the deep sea floor toward the sunlit zone above, their presence creating powerful upwelling currents that carried cold, fierce nutrient-rich water from the abyss toward the surface. These nutrients seeded vast blooms of microscopic phytoplankton across the open water, and those blooms in turn fed everything above them in the great oceanic food web. The ocean was a machine of almost unimaginable biological productivity, and it ran without interruption season after season, century after century for millions of years. Whales flourished in this world in a remarkable variety of forms, some small and agile, hunting fish and squid through the open water with speed and precision. Others vast and slow, cruising through plankton-rich currents with their enormous mouths open, filtering the sea itself for sustenance. Ancestors of modern dolphins traveled in social groups, their intelligence and communication already well developed, their lives organized around cooperation and memory in ways that seem almost familiar to us now. The ancient ocean was not a wilderness of silence and emptiness, but a living community of astonishing depth and intricacy. And it was within this community, at its very apex, that one predator rose slowly to complete and enduring dominance. The story of Megalodon was not discovered the way the stories of many prehistoric animals were discovered, not through the patient excavation of complete skeletons, not through the careful assembly of bones laid out on museum floors. Sharks are built from cartilage rather than bone, and cartilage, soft and flexible in life, rarely survives the long compression of geological time. It dissolves, disperses, leaves almost nothing behind. What sharks do leave behind, in extraordinary abundance and preservation, are teeth, dense, mineralized, built to last, replacing themselves throughout the animal's lifetime in the hundreds and eventually the thousands, each one falling away in turn and drifting down to the seafloor, where it slowly becomes stone. And Megalodon teeth are unlike anything else in the fossil record. Across many parts of the world, from the coastal sediments of the American Southeast to the cliffs of Europe, the riverbeds of Africa, and the beaches of Australia, paleontologists and curious beachcombers alike have been turning up these extraordinary objects for centuries. Some measure nearly 18 centimeters in length, broad and thick and finely serrated along both edges, their surfaces worn to a dark or smooth polish by millions of years of burial. To hold one is to hold something that feels genuinely significant, an object with weight not just in your hand but in the imagination, a direct physical connection to a creature and a world impossibly remote from our own. For centuries, the people who found these fossils had no framework for understanding what they were. In medieval Europe, they were called glossopetrae, tongue stones, and were believed to be the petrified tongues of serpents or dragons, or perhaps miraculous objects that had rained down from the heavens during thunderstorms. They were worn as amulets, mounted in silver, displayed in the cabinets of nobles and scholars as objects of wonder and mystery. It was only in the 17th century that the Danish naturalist Nicholas Steno first proposed that they might be the teeth of ancient sharks, a suggestion that was radical at the time and that opened the long road toward our modern understanding of the fossil record. Megalodon first appears in the fossil record approximately 23 million years ago, during the early Miocene, and its scientific name, Otodus, and Megalodon translates simply and honestly as big tooth, a name that understates the animal it belongs to in almost every other respect. Based on careful analysis of fossil teeth and comparisons with the anatomy of living sharks, scientists estimate that the largest megalodons may have reached lengths of 15 to 20 meters, roughly 50 to 65 feet, with body masses that in the largest individuals may have exceeded 50 metric tons. It was, and by any measure, the most formidable shark that has ever lived and one of the most powerful predators in the entire history of animal life on Earth. Its body would have been broadly streamlined, built for sustained and efficient movement through open water rather than for short bursts of speed. A long, powerful torpedo-shaped animal whose sheer size conveyed a kind of authority that required no display, no aggression, no performance. Large, pectoral fins extended from its flanks like broad, in steady wings providing lift and stability as it moved through the water column. Its tail, wide and powerful, drove it forward with slow rhythmic strokes that consumed very little energy relative to the distances it could cover. It was an animal designed by millions of years of evolution to move through its world with the minimum of effort and the maximum of effect. And yet, for all its power, there is something oddly peaceful about imagining Megalodon moving through its ancient ocean. Not because it was gentle, it was not, but because it was so perfectly at home in its world, so completely and unhurriedly itself, that the impression it leaves is less of menace than of deep and settled belonging. Megalodon did not swim through an empty sea. The ancient ocean it inhabited was crowded with life in ways difficult to fully imagine. A dense and layered community of organisms, each one occupying its particular position in the web of feeding and being fed. The whole system humming along with the quiet efficiency of something that has had millions of years to find its balance. The whales of the Miocene were already ancient, their lineage stretching back tens of millions of years to the shallow coastal waters where their land-dwelling ancestors had first begun to return to the sea. By the time of Megalodon, they had diversified into dozens of forms, some small and swift, pursuing fish through the upper water column, others immense and slow-moving, their bodies adapted for the filtering of vast quantities of water, harvesting the microscopic abundance of the plankton blooms. These large baleen whales were, almost certainly, among Megalodon's most important prey. And the relationship between predator and prey had been shaping both lineages across millions of years of parallel evolution. Sea cows, large, slow, and gentle mammals, grazed the seagrass meadows of tropical shallows, their rounded bodies moving through the warm water with an unhurried serenity, cropping the underwater vegetation with the same patient thoroughness that grazing animals bring to a meadow on land. Giant sea turtles, their lineages already ancient, paddled through warm currents on their long seasonal migrations, navigating by cues we still do not fully understand. The ocean of 20 million years ago was not a wilderness of constant violence, but a community in balance, complex and self-sustaining, with a Megalodon as its most powerful and least challenged member. The evidence of how Megalodon hunted comes to us in the most direct possible way, written into the bones of its prey. Fossil whale skeletons recovered from ancient marine sediments around the world bear the unmistakable signatures of Megalodon's teeth. Deep grooves and punctures whose size and spacing match precisely the dimensions of the largest Megalodon teeth, preserved in bone that has been mineralizing slowly for millions of years. Some of these bones show signs of healing around the wound, meaning the whale survived its encounter and carried the mark of it for the remainder of its life. Others show no healing at all. The approach itself would likely have been unhurried and largely invisible. Rising slowly from the blue-green twilight of the deeper water column toward a whale feeding or resting near the surface. Megalodon would have been a shadow among shadows, growing imperceptibly larger until the moment of contact. In the dim and boundless waters of the Miocene Ocean, such a hunt would have unfolded in near silence, observed by no one, concluded before the surface of the sea, or had time to record it. For nearly 20 million years, Megalodon moved through warm and abundant seas, its dominance uncontested, its world stable and generous. But the Earth is always changing, and the forces that had once conspired to create the conditions in which Megalodon thrived were already, slowly and without announcement, beginning to shift. By the late Miocene, roughly 6 to 8 million years ago, the global climate had begun a long and gradual cooling, the average temperatures of the world's oceans declining by increments too small to measure across any individual lifetime, but unmistakable when viewed across the broad canvas of geological time. Polar ice sheets expanded, drawing water out of the ocean basins and lowering sea levels across the world. The warm, shallow coastal seas that had covered such enormous areas of the continents began, gradually and then more quickly, to drain away, retreating toward the deeper ocean basins and taking with them the rich and productive ecosystems they had supported. Whale populations shifted in response, moving toward the higher latitudes where the cooling waters were generating new abundances of the small fish and krill that filter feeders depended upon, following the food into environments that were increasingly cold, increasingly distant from the warm coastal zones where Megalodon had done most of its hunting across millions of years. The world was becoming, slowly and irreversibly, a different place, and the particular kind of world that Megalodon had been shaped for across 20 million years was quietly, gently disappearing. Around 3.5 million years ago, during the Pliocene epoch, Megalodon disappears from the fossil record. The teeth, which had been accumulating in marine sediments around the world for nearly 20 million years, simply stop appearing above a certain geological horizon, a line drawn in the rock that marks, as precisely as we can measure, the end of this animal's presence in the ocean. And so Megalodon faded slowly, over hundreds of thousands of years, its range contracting, its encounters with sufficient prey growing less frequent, its numbers thinning generation by generation until at last there was nothing left. It was not a dramatic ending. It rarely is in the deep history of the natural world. The ocean simply changed around the animal that had once been its sovereign, and the animal, perfectly adapted to a world that no longer existed, could not change with it. The ocean closed over its passing the way it closes over everything, quietly, completely, without leaving a trace on the surface. The ocean today is still vast, still deep, still carrying within it an almost unimaginable richness and complexity of life. Blue whales move through cold polar waters in their unhurried way. The largest animals that have ever existed on Earth, their low songs traveling for hundreds of miles through the deep sound channel in frequencies almost too low for human ears to register. Great white sharks patrol the temperate coastlines with the lean efficiency of something that has been refined by hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Dolphins leap in the bow waves of ships. Sea turtles complete their ancient migrations across open ocean, navigating by the Earth's magnetic field toward beaches they have never seen but somehow know. The ocean breathes on as it always has, moved by the same tides and warmed by the same sun that shone over the Miocene seas where Megalodon once moved. Deep beneath the surface, undisturbed in the cold and pressure of the abyssal sediment, the layers of ancient time lie quietly stacked upon one another, each one a record of the world that existed when it was formed. And within those layers, scattered across the ocean floors of the world from the shallows to the deep, lie the teeth of Megalodon. Thousands of them, perhaps tens of thousands, waiting in the dark as they have waited for millions of years, patient as the stone they have become. We will never see this animal alive. Its world is closed to us by the irreversible passage of time, its ocean gone, its prey transformed into the whales and dolphins and sea mammals of our own era, its own body long since returned to the elements from which it was made. But the water remains. The same ocean that parted before that enormous body still surrounds us, still moves in the same deep currents, still carries the same ancient silence in its deepest places. And in that silence, if you let yourself drift into it, if you let the weight of the day lift and the breath slow and the mind grow quiet and wide, there is something there that feels very old and very patient and very, very still. Let the ocean hold you now. Let the deep water rise around you, warm and dark and ancient and complete. Somewhere far below, in the blue-black quiet where no light reaches, the memory of the greatest shark that ever lived drifts on in the cold and the silence, unhurried, sovereign, at peace in the only world it ever needed, the ocean. I remembers everything, and tonight in the long, slow tide of sleep, it remembers you too.